Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Air Force Association's annual Airspace Cyber Conference and Trade Show, the #1 gathering of U.S. Air Force leaders from around the world. Our coverage here is sponsored by L3 Harris and Leonardo DRS, and it's our honor to be talking to the Chief of the United States Air Force Reserve, Air Force Lieutenant General Richard Scobee. Sir, thanks very much for the time. You have made reforming the Air Force Reserve top priority. It's a tremendous organization and key to the total force model the U.S. Air Force employs, where oftentimes you can't tell who's a reservist, who's a guardsman, and who's active duty, which is, I think, one of the most outstanding features of the Air Force in delivering the mission. Talk to us about the reform priorities, though, because there is a sense that every organization can be made better. The Reserve has had certain challenges in terms of, but too much admin stuff, crowding into training. Talk to us about some of the fundamental tenets that you and your Command Master Chief are working to try to reform the organization.
Thanks, Vago. Really what it is let me start at the top. So when the Command Chief and I came into this job, really what we were looking at is 3 lines of effort. The first one was getting after our readiness, and how do we build that, along with making sure that we always have the strategic depth in order to surge to meet the needs of the American people as we go forward. The second thing was building resilient leaders. Resiliency is so important in our organization, especially in the reserves, because sometimes we're separated by a lot of distance. And the third one is exactly what you were talking about. It's reforming our organization. And so the Command Chief and I, we set out on this journey a year ago, and we said, what is it that we are doing or not doing that makes our airmen's lives either easier and better or harder? And let's get after the things that are making our airmen's lives harder. And it usually revolves around finance or some of our personnel issues and personnel programs. And what we want to do is make sure that we relieve that pressure on them. And so we've been really getting after that change over the last year, and it's made a huge difference. And what we're looking to do is ensure that we can retain the right number of people. So in the Reserve Command, our model it's a best value model, right? If you were to ask me, what is your job for the Air Force? My job is to make sure that I give the Secretary of the Air Force and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force the best combat capability I can at the least burden to our taxpayers. So really what we do is we focus on retention efforts, and we really focus on retaining that Air Force investment. So I'm trying to bring people from, if they decide to get out of the active component, let me give them a way to serve that best suits the needs of their family. And that's what the Reserve Command does.
Talk to us a little bit about, with a little greater specific on each one of those priorities. You did talk about, support for folks a little bit, but talk to us about the first 2 in terms of building those resilient airmen and building that kind of overall structure that you're looking for in a little bit greater detail.
Okay, great. So when I talk about readiness as a form, if you look at my priorities, they dovetail into exactly what the Air Force is doing. And that dovetails in exactly what the Department of Defense is doing with the National Defense Strategy. So you can work all the way back to what the Command Chief and I are doing. So really for the readiness, that's the thing. How do I make sure that I have all the combat capability that we need to fight America's wars? That is what we're getting after. So with that I got to have strategic depth. So since 1991, the Reserve has been fully engaged in everything that the Air Force is doing. So what we need to make sure is we do have that operational layer. I'll give you an example. Nearly 50% of the global positioning satellites for the entire globe is flown by the Air Force Reserve Command. We are part of what the Space Command is doing. So that is what is really interesting. We have a part of that. So we do that operational layer. But I also have to be able to maintain the surge capability. So I talked about a best value approach. What we do is we put things in the reserve, and it makes it cheaper for the American people to have, because I don't have to pay everybody all the time. 75% to 70%, depending on the weapon system, of my people are part-time. And so that really saves a lot of money. And when I need them, I bring them on, and they're always trained, always ready to go, and out the door in 72 hours. And that is the value that we're trying to bring. The next thing is resilience piece. Command Chief and I talk about this all the time, and it's resilient leaders, but even young airmen, they're leading somebody. They're leading small teams. They're leading themselves. How do we make sure that they have the skills they need to be successful wherever the Air Force needs them? And it goes for my general officers, and it goes all the way down to my youngest airmen. And I'm talking about 2 aspects of this. And first of all, how do I give them the training that they need so that they avoid problems? And the majority of problems for my airmen in resiliency is either financial or personal problems in relationships. So how do I give them the tools to have healthy finances and have healthy relationships? But if something does go wrong, how do I make sure that they know that they're always part of my family. I don't care if they're working in the civilian company or whatever it is, they're always part of the Air Force family. And if they need help, the Congress and the American people have given us the tools to be able to help them. And as a good friend of mine said, no organization in America has the capability like the United States military. And we have the tools to be able to help them. I just need them to ask when they're having problems because I don't always have access to my airmen that are part-time.
Let's talk a little bit about the admin and the overhead piece of it, right? I mean, drill weekends are very, very precious. At the end of the day, each military service has mandatory training, mandatory admin requirements, mandatory boxes you have to check, whether it's online training or direct, whether it's motorcycles. I mean, the sheer number of things. General Mosley and I, used to talk sometimes about, sexual assault. We know that that's very, very important. His frustration was, why is it we have to repeat this stuff? His idea was if I threw out 20,000 airmen a year, we'd start the problem, try to work towards solving that problem. But ultimately, you have to do some of this training because there are reasons to do it. And yet it impinges, especially on reservists, and their fundamental ability to get that training done in a drill weekend, for example. Talk to us a little bit about how you can alleviate this burden and perhaps, as a reformer, do you need to adopt a completely different reserve model at the end of the day so that you have more time to spend with your airmen in order to be able to get the kind of training you need for a much more great power future?
You could do my job because that is exactly what we're doing.
I can almost assure you, sir, there's no way I would be able to do your job, but that's very, very kind of you.
This is what we're getting after. So when I talk about reforming the organization, let's take that UTA weekend where we have our airmen for drill. Every complaint I get, and some of the reasons why when we do exit surveys with our airmen, why are they leaving? It's because we're not giving them the time to do their Air Force Specialty Code training. Airmen that are flying airplanes, they want to fly airplanes. Airmen that are turning wrenches on the flight line want to turn wrenches. So what we are doing in order to get after that is two things. One is it started with the Secretary of the Air Force. Get rid of the things that don't add value to our programs. That's the first thing. The second thing is the command chief and I have gone out and looked at how do we push down authority to the lowest level to make decisions. And what we want to do is empower our basic fighting units, the squadrons, in order to make these decisions. So one is squadron commanders are now able to make the decisions on what is important for their organization. And the second thing is we're giving them the tools. So if she wants to go out and do training en masse with her organization, she can do that that is building teamwork and building camaraderie within our organization while they're getting some of this done. And the third thing we're doing is giving them the time in order to do that and the flexibility to do it, not on the UTA weekends when they want to really get after their training and readiness, but do it at other times during the week. The other thing, Vago, that we're doing is we're adding full-time support. So what we're doing now is we're putting in medical folks and we're putting in specialists that work in administration, just like you talked about. And they are doing that during the week because they're full-time. Then on the weekends, people are freed up to do the training they want, and that's what makes a happy airman.
Do you, the model that we have had for the longest time has been sort of the 1 weekend a month, 2 weeks a year. Obviously, if you're an aviator, you've got a lot more training that goes along with that. Well, not a lot more training, but a little bit more training. And obviously do have the opportunity to fly more as the need arises, right? I mean, that's a ready pool that you use, both on the operational side as well. I mean, it works particularly well for mobility missions because it's somewhat more planned and regular in terms of the in and out in the cruise. But I just got back from the United Kingdom, and Britain has a little bit of a different model in terms of how they go about doing it. In part, there's like a evening a week, for example, that's contributed, and then you've got field weekends and things like that. Is it time to start experimenting with models that are a little bit different than the ones that we have, that put everybody in touch on a more close and more regular manner than how we do it today?
I would love to be able to do that. And in some ways we are. So I would say there's two pieces to this. One is, what are the skill sets that we need? There are some Air Force Specialty Codes that require more training than others. In pilots is the example that you use. It takes between 6 and 8 days a month for a pilot to maintain their combat capability. So that is the requirement that they do that. So one of its requirements. And so there are other AFSCs that may not require that, and 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year would suffice to make sure that they're fully trained for the things that they need to do. In general, though, the average reservist works about 6 days a month. The average reservist. Some people are on full-time orders, that are backfilling other jobs that need to be done. But for the most part, between 4 and 6 days a month is what, and that includes the 2 weeks a year. That's eaten up in there too. But that's what an average reservist is going to commit to our program. So the ones that need more training, high-end training, we will absolutely make sure they do that. But it goes on the requirement, and then it goes on availability. Again, I go back to, we have got to give our people, we need people to serve. And service to your country is hard. So how do I make it easy for them to serve and beneficial? I will never compensate them enough. There is no way that I can pay, and you talked about it at the beginning with the unemployment rates that we have. I can't compete with Silicon Valley. I can't compete with a lot of organizations out there. But what I can do is give them a way to serve their country in a way that best suits the needs of their family so they can serve.
Tell us a little bit about recruitment, right? I mean, it's a little bit easier to be getting folks who are coming out of active duty. You know, they're already trained up and a lot of the hurdles are solved. But then again, there are folks who are going to be coming in directly and accessing directly into the reserves. Are you getting the kind of talent that you want? How can the reserve play a bigger role in the Air Force-wide pilot retention problem, whether it's on the combat Air Force's side of things or on the mobility side?
So there's two things that we're getting after. One is we've combined the recruiting services. So all my recruiters that were working just in the Reserve Command, we're now combined them with the recruiting services down in San Antonio. So Major General Jeannie Levitt is the one who's running that. Her deputy is Brigadier General Bull Durham. So he is a reservist, and we put him there. So he's shepherding that part of our program. This is great because we're doing two things. We're teaching the active duty recruiters before about what it means to be a guardsman or a reservist. And then when they fill up their prior service buckets that they're allowed to keep, they can make sure that they funnel those leads to us. And that will get after us recruiting our prior service, folks that are coming from other services or the Air Force that have already been trained and served. And that's where that's the best value approach. So in a perfect world, we'd have about 30% of our folks come straight off the street, come in, we train them, and we go from there. And 70% of them we assess from other services or from the Air Force. Right now, it's about 64% on average that we have across the board. And every percentage I get closer to 70%, that's going to be better for us because it's going to be savings for our taxpayers. So we're really working to do that. And the way I do that is I'm gaining enough people through the recruiters, but I really need to focus on retention. And what are the things that are driving retention? And those are the things we talked about before in reforming the organization.
And in terms of helping solve the broader pilot retention problem, speaking as a pilot in your case?
Right. I am committed to this program, so they have me. But that's one of my thousands of pilots. But really, so pilot retention has been difficult. And I would say in the combat air forces with our fighters and bombers and things like that, we've been very successful. My most strained resources are our tanker pilots because they are really working hard. So we're working with Mobility to Command to make sure that we're giving our people and their employers enough time away from the surge that has been going on since really 1991. So what we're trying to do is ensure we're doing that. But the pilot training crisis is an Air Force crisis, and we're trying to solve it together, all three components, the Guard, the Reserve, and obviously the active component Air Force. And what we're really focused on is how do we give people the ability to do their job and then take away the admin that is the burdensome piece of what we're doing, and that will get after retention.
Although I can hear a earlier generation of pilots saying like, hey, look, I had all kinds of squadron duties, and there's no reason for you guys to get out of it just because you just want to have the fun part of it, which is the flying part of it, because hey, who the hell wouldn't like that?
Well, I can tell you this. I'm from that generation, and in my multi-decade career, I've run the gambit. But I would say this is that the Air Force has to evolve based on what societal norms are. And right now, it's really important that we do the things that are important to retain the assets that we've trained. And if that is downloading some of those administrative burdens, that's what it's going to be. But it's not just my pilots. It's all my airmen that need the relief that we're talking about.
Two more quick questions. One, great power competition obviously is the big focus, the entire force. We're listening to increasingly expeditionary operations. That means units moving around a lot more. How does that change how you train? How does the new expeditionary model change it for you guys, because it's different when you're a reservist in these cases. The kind of high-intensity operations, for example, the rest of the Air Force is engaging in is different. And, you know, how are you guys playing into that? Because at the end of the day, whatever forces you generate are the ones that are going to have to be going in there if necessary and getting into that high-intensity fight.
You're exactly right. So we are in lockstep with the Air Force. Everything that the Air Force is doing as we go forward, the Reserve is in lockstep with the Air Force. So as we train for these things, what's really nice is a lot of the continuity and a lot of the great instructors are in the Reserve. So we are leading the way on some of these changes that are going on. So about 30% of our folks are full-time. So they're the day-to-day operations, flying operations, whatever it is, and they're embedded into every organization. So if you look at Air Combat Command, AFSOC, Air Mobility Command, all those things, we have reservists embedded and wings aligned with those organizations as well. And what they do is they train. So every major exercise that the Air Force does, the Reserve and Guard is part of it. So we are getting that same training, and then we're bringing it back to our organizations to ensure we do it. Our model is we make people weapon system experts. From the time they're young airmen to the time they're master sergeants, from the time they're lieutenants to the time they're lieutenant colonels. We focus on be a weapon system expert, be the best you can be for the Air Force. And then after that, like the command chief and myself, we have to move around and we get other experiences. So what we do is weapon system experts, so when there's a high-end fight, you are ready to go. I'll give you an example. Do you know who the first American was to employ the F-35 in combat? It was a reservist. So we are already in the high-end fight and doing it every day and using the high-end equipment. This is what the American people expect of us, and it's what we're going to do.
Everybody is very happy that United States Space Command is back. General Raymond certainly is going to do a terrific job as a space warfighter his entire career. But there are questions about the Space Force being created. What challenge is that going to provide you, given that you provide such extraordinary talent that goes into the Space Force, the Space Command and the space community? The U.S. Air Force has prided itself on being in space technically even before you were a United States Air Force in terms of the thinking that went into that new frontier, and that the entire nation's space architecture by and large is run by the U.S. Air Force and certainly architected, or the U.S. Air Force has been an architect. Architected is a horrible word. How does this work when people came in to wear the Air Force blue uniform and now may go someplace else? I mean, what are the challenges associated with it? And have you guys thought through what do you keep, who you get rid of, and how the mechanics of this would work at the end of the day?
You know, I'm going to give you my personal opinion on how this is going, and the way I view it is what I really should say. A Space Force is absolutely necessary for our country going forward. Putting the emphasis on space and that domain is really important. We are doing the right thing by going forward on this, absolutely. I talk to General Raymond all the time, and matter of fact, next week we'll be out in Colorado discussing this very issue. How does the Guard and Reserve come along with that? Now, I have a whole space wing, and then in every aspect of what space does, I have reservists. And we were talking about it earlier, nearly 50% of the global positioning satellites are maintained by reservists every day. So they are in the space fight. So really what's going to happen is how we exactly flesh out with what the reserve component is going to look like. It will still maintain the reserve component piece. But that's going to go with the Space Command, and it's going to go there, and it's going to continue to do the business of what Space Command needs us to do. And it is an extension of where we are as airmen, and it's a logical extension, just like as we grew out of the Signal Corps to become the Air Force back in the 1940s. It's going to be the same thing for the Space Force. Our people are really well postured to go forward, and I don't see any limitation to it. Yes, there's going to be a lot of looking at authorities and things like that. General Raymond, he is the guy. He understands what his mission has got to be as he stands up the Space Command. But as far as the people that will go with him in order to get this job done, they're ready. Whatever happens, they're ready to go, and they know what their job is. What I want to make sure is I want to take care of people, and you don't have to spend much time with me to know that I love our people, and that's what's important to me. So I want to make sure that the authorities that Congress has given me, along with the money, that we make sure that we keep that together, and we take care of those airmen that go over. That's what I'm most concerned about, because the mission is going to keep going. But I want to make sure that we have a solid reserve component to help General Raymond go forward.
It's interesting we're having this conversation a day before the latest anniversary of the U.S. Air Force, and friends of mine actually who I interviewed a long time ago and sadly are since deceased, who were Army Air Forces people who made that transition in 1947, just overnight becoming the U.S. Air Force, and wearing the same uniforms and wearing everything until everything got kind of sorted out and the blue uniform came in and everything else. So we'll see how that goes. United States Air Force Lieutenant General Richard Scobee, Commander of the U.S. Air Force Reserve. Sir, thanks very much. Absolute pleasure, and look forward to staying in touch.
Thank you very much. It was great talking with you.